In 1987, when Chiang Ching-kuo, Taiwan's president, decided to lift martial law, he ended 38 years of authoritarian rule, discontinuing the practice of separating the public and private spheres to survive, or in other words, what can be said and what can't, making Taiwan a new frontier of democracy in the Far East. This decision was a drastic difference in how people in Taiwan were treated by the government before. When the Kuomintang, the nationalist party that took Taiwan, took over, they filled government positions with people from mainland China. The Taiwanese people felt discontent at this, since before the Kuomintang took over, they were able to govern themselves. This situation caused tension between the government of Taiwan and the people, which would soon lead to a national tragedy. On February 27, 1947, agents from the Tobacco Monopoly Bureau tried to confiscate contraband cigarettes from a 40-year-old woman who was selling them. When she asked the agents to return her money and cigarettes, one of the agents beat her on the head with his pistol. Then, an angry crowd gathered to confront the agents for their excessive use of force. As the agents escaped, one fired into the crowd, killing an innocent bystander. The following morning, a mass protest started, compounding on existing discontent over rising unemployment rates, inflation, and government corruption. The protesters started marching on the Tobacco Monopoly Bureau to call for action against the agents involved. When they arrived at the Governor General's office, his guards opened fire. This violence sparked an open rebellion that lasted for weeks, resulting in thousands of deaths. It was on this day that martial law was declared. Afterwards, the Taiwanese people lived in silence, fearing that if they were to talk about this day, known as 228, they would be held captive by the secret police. Quoting former Grand Justice Xu Yuxiu, "It's already been 3 decades since the lifting of martial law, and our bounded eyes, ears, mouth, nose, hands, and feet still seem as if they're trapped in mud. It's because of these bonds that we hobble slowly along the path to transitional justice." The repeal of martial law represented the starting point of Taiwan democracy and the end of dictatorial rule. This decision was made to break the final obstacle that stood in front of Taiwan's democratization, officially marking Taiwan as a new, though inchoate, democratic frontier in the Far East. Despite the end of martial law being the first official step towards democracy, democratic seeds were already planted. Although not many people in Taiwan would think of the end of martial law as significant because there wasn't much change in daily life. In fact, the major events that would lead Taiwan towards a more full democracy wouldn't happen until a few years after the repeal, through an uprising of student activists, movements, and protests. During martial law, campus activism was limited to small, disorganized groups who used underground posters, graffiti, campus rallies, and speeches to fight for freedom of speech. Some students helped with campaigns and activities promoting democracy. However, the students that were involved in this would face punishment if their schools found out. The largest difference between student activism before and after the repeal was that student activists always had to face uncertainty as to what would happen to them if caught. When Chiang Ching-kuo lifted martial law, the activists that were fighting for democracy were able to do so without another tragic 228 massacre taking place. It's because of this that students were able to form the major protests and movements that would influence the government to reform, such as the Wild Lily student movement, where over 20,000 protesters sat in to convince the Taiwanese government to continue democratization. The best chance for Taiwan to survive, politically and economically, was to implement democracy. As Taiwan shifted towards more capital-intensive and knowledge-based industries, companies later started manufacturing semiconductors and electronic equipment. As a result, Taiwan became, and still is, the world's leading country in semiconductors and the leading exporter in monitors, keyboards, scanners, and more, making Taiwan a technological powerhouse. However, this would not have been possible without the U.S.'s involvement in Taiwan's democracy, a frontier that greatly impacts the world in multiple ways. In the 1960s, as Taiwan became known for its plentiful and cheap labor-intensive industries, their popularity and economy grew, and soon they became the world's primary exporter in consumer goods. Because of this, Taiwan became of marginal supply significance to the U.S. As a result, in 1973, Taiwan became the U.S.'s 7th largest source of U.S. imports. This rapid trade expansion by Taiwan was not only with the U.S., but with other countries as well, such as Japan, Asia, and the EEC. The U.S. became Taiwan's largest foreign market, and in 1975, America preoccupied 34% of Taiwan's exports. As the U.S. became more involved with Taiwan's economy, they began to see the potential of what democracy in Taiwan would show. An example of freedom and economic importance that resulted from democracy, which wasn't as popular in the Far East. So the U.S. saw this as an opportunity to spread democracy to the other parts of the world. As a result, the U.S. became more involved in the continuity of American policies, or simply democracy in Taiwan. This is clearly evident from the letters between Chiang Ching-kuo and Gerald R. Ford, the 38th U.S. President, where President Ford expressed his gratitude for Chiang Ching-kuo's cooperation with the continuity of democracy in Taiwan, and hoping to continue this cooperation. Once martial law was repealed, officially breaking the long authoritarian rule, starting a democratic frontier in the Far East, the State Department welcomed it, stating Taiwan has made significant progress toward increased democracy and respect for human rights. We believe that the lifting of martial law is an important event which symbolizes the commitment of the Taiwan authorities to continue this process. The repeal of martial law greatly impacted Taiwan-U.S. relations. When Taiwan lifted martial law, it represented Taiwan's commitment to breaking away from its authoritarian past and implementing U.S. policies, which resulted in the U.S. trading with Taiwan more, boosting Taiwan's economy and reputation. The U.S. also made a commitment in protecting Taiwan, such as honoring the Taiwan Relations Act, where the U.S. agrees to provide Taiwan with the arms of a defensive character. Today, the U.S. is Taiwan's second largest trading partner, with Taiwan supplying a large amount of the U.S.'s semiconductor ICs. However, it's because of Taiwan's importance, politically and economically, that the recent tensions between the U.S. and China have occurred. Taiwan was originally a part of China before given to Japan in the Treaty of Shimonoseki. However, soon after, the ROC-Japan Peace Treaty of 1952 was finalized, including the transfer of Taiwan's sovereignty from Japan to Taiwan. Despite this, China claims that the Treaty of Shimonoseki was nullified due to the Sino-Japanese Peace Treaty of 1952, making Taiwan a province of China. China brought this up in their One China policy, where only 13 countries officially see Taiwan as independent, not including the U.S. Taiwan's significance economically, accounting for around 65% of global semiconductor supply and nearly 90% of the most sophisticated chips, is large enough that if China were to take Taiwan by force and succeed, China would have control over the Taiwan Strait, used by 1/3 of the world's sea traffic, which could spur an economic global crisis. On top of that, Taiwan accounts for a large portion of the world's electronic products, semiconductors, and advanced chips, but without Western imports of raw materials and equipment, production would quickly cease, which will have major consequences. Quoting an executive in the industry, "A world without Taiwan is a world back to the Stone Age." It's because of Taiwan's economic importance, something that the lifting of martial law greatly boosted, that the U.S. greatly supports the status quo, not wanting to go to war with China but still being committed to Taiwan. The U.S. commitment to Taiwan is evident by the events in 2022, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of House, decided to visit Taiwan, resulting in Beijing launching joint military exercises around the island, and suspending 8 official military dialogues and cooperation channels with the U.S. Taiwan faced unprecedented provocations, including ballistic missile launches over the island, air and naval operations across the center line and on the edge of Taiwan's territorial waters, and the volume of cyber attacks 23 times higher than the previous daily record. U.S. President Joe Biden responded to this by stating that U.S. forces would defend Taiwan militarily if China were to take Taiwan by force, supporting the commitment the U.S. made to Taiwan in the Taiwan Relations Act.
Are you willing to get involved militarily to defend Taiwan if it comes to that?
Yes.
You are?
That's the commitment we made.
After this, multiple statements by the U.S., including one from Nancy Pelosi herself, have been made about this situation, all supporting Taiwan. While the current tensions between China and Taiwan are built up from years of complex history and international relations, the lifting of martial law greatly impacted this tension by bringing the U.S. into the equation through democracy. This critical decision to make Taiwan a new democratic frontier influences the economy and political leadership in the world greatly, and will continue to do so.